government.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the difficulties that were faced during this time?
Okay. During that time, before independence and before a lot of Namibians really started going into exile, as you can imagine, in the northern part of the country, that's where a lot of these atrocities were taking place, you know, against the people by the South African apartheid regime. And I can just tell you about my own family. My father was a political activist, and he was constantly tortured and jailed, and it was a very uncomfortable situation because you were never, you couldn't just rest. Something was always happening somewhere to your family or elsewhere. So what happened? And then sometimes schools were closed, you know, because the schools were attacked. So there were so many, people just went through a lot of difficulties. So in my family's case, like a lot of other Namibians, my father thought enough was enough. And that was in 74. He was jailed just before that, and alongside with other Namibians. And they decided, you know what, let's go into exile. By that time, other people like Sam Nujoma and other people had already left the country. So what he did with his friends, they went into exile in Angola to join Swapo in exile. And I can't quite remember if it was a few weeks later or a few months later, they sent for their wives and children, you know, that group that went with my father. So we followed. We were sneaked out of our house in the middle of the night, my mother and 7 of us at the time, and she was heavily pregnant. And I was only 3 years. That was in 1974. So we went, some good Samaritan drove us up to the border. And then, of course, at the border, you have to get out of your cars and sneak very carefully out of the country, because if you didn't, there are people, hundreds and hundreds of people that have been shot at or just retained. You know, they were captured, and so you had to be very, very extra careful. So we went across the border. We managed. And it was a group of us. I can't really say how many. I was 3. And from what I have been told, my mother and other families, they were helped to carry by other young people to carry us. And one of these, the person who carried me, he was a 14-year-old boy. And at some point, once we crossed the borders into Angola, before we got to where the Swapo soldiers were with transport, this guy, he left me. He got tired because I was kind of a heavy baby. So he left me in the bush. And later, I don't know how many miles my people, the entire group had walked. And my mother thought, you know, mother's instinct, one of my kids is missing. I said, no, all the kids are here. I said, no, let's count them. She counted, there were only 6. And some people were sent to come and get me. And they found me there nicely comfortable, playing with ants and sand and minding my own business. And yeah, after that, we got to where the Swapo soldiers were waiting for us, and then took us to a temporary refugee camp in Angola. And then after that, a few weeks, I believe, later, we went into Zambia. And in Zambia, we were given another temporary place. And I'm sure the people that you have spoken to before, they told you about the old farm. That was our first initial settlement. And we stayed in the old farm, I believe, until 1975. At that time, I was 4, and I can remember a little bit what transpired in that camp. You know, I was a kid, 4 years, but still. And after that, the Zambian government, under the leadership of Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, the government was very gracious enough to give us this piece of land in the western province of Zambia. And of course, it was just a land. It was untamed, you know. So we went there and we tried to make it our home, you know, by starting sleeping under the trees, and then we had tents, and then after that we started making our own houses, and that is where I grew up. I grew up there with my siblings and other Swapo children. My family was one of the lucky ones because I had my mom and dad in exile, but then my father at the beginning of the struggle, I think about 1975, 76, somehow he went and they went to form another party, Swapo D. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah.
Swapo D. And my mother decided, no, we came in exile under the auspices of Swapo. We are not going to leave Swapo. That's one organization that we know is going to liberate our country. And I'm happy that my mother stuck to that. And yeah, so we grew up in Swapo. You could call me a Swapo child, you know. And of course, the educational system, it was as fragile as you can imagine in a refugee camp. You know, starting learning your ABCs from under the tree, and then of course we constructed later our own classrooms. We had issues with teachers because, as you can imagine, the educational system of Namibia that time, it was terrible. You know, you were only inside Namibia as a black person. You were only allowed to be educated up to a certain standard, you know, and also if you really were highly educated, then you would be a teacher or a nurse, or, you know, very few fortunate folks, they ventured out somehow. They managed to go to South Africa and elsewhere to study medicine and became medical doctors and all that. But so in exile too, in our refugee camps, we would have people that were sent out of the refugee camp to do further studies in Britain, in the Soviet Union, or in other, you know, places in the Scandinavia, in Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, and these people came back. Some of these people came back to the refugee and they became our teachers. But without proper facilities, you know, you can just imagine how the educational system was. And after that, when I was 14, I was one of the few lucky ones to leave the refugee camp and sent to study in a proper school. When you went out, it was always a beautiful thing when you went out of the refugee camp. Because it wasn't easy, it was tough. So I went to a Zambian high school, which was in Ndola, with 14 other, we were 17 of us, 14 girls and 3 boys from the primary school that we had in the refugee camp. Because we didn't have, you couldn't go up to secondary school in the camp. We didn't have that. But then we went to high school in a Zambian school, and they had the British system. And, you know, you could only learn that much English in a refugee camp. You know, we were chosen as one of the best students at the time. But when you went to a proper secondary school, you are like at the bottom of the ladder. So there began my journey of always being, you get into a place and you're at the bottom of the ladder and trying to work yourself up. But unfortunately, okay, we went there from Form 1, you know, you understand the Form 1, I believe it's grade 8, 9, 10, when we were in Form 3, we were 4 of us, 3 girls, and 1 guy. We were, one night, the Swapo Secretary of Education and the military attaché in Zambia, Lusaka, they came to Ndola to apparently get us away from secondary school to go to Angola for military training. And that was because, they heard we were naughty. We were young. I was 16. We would sneak out of the house, go to a teen time disco. It used to be between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. And they decided, these kids are naughty. They are going to run away. They are going to fugit from the liberation movement. And God knows who they talk to, when they are out there in the clubs. And so they came. I did not understand. I am 16. I was enjoying my school. And then you want to take me to a military camp to be trained as a soldier. Yes, I was in exile. I knew I wanted, you are there, you are freedom fighters. But come on now, at 16, it didn't augur well with me. It didn't augur well with my friends that we were leaving behind, and the friends that were also apparently naughty like me. But anyway, we took it as it was. It was part of the struggle. In every revolution, things can't always go smoothly. There are some who are really going to feel it. There are some, So we went we were flown out the next morning. We were on the plane to Angola, and then we went to Lubango. That was the Swapo military camp. And it went very well for 6 months, with my AK-47, which was, because I'm a short girl, which was almost on the floor. The training was great, but of course, one was always bitter that, I could have been at school. There were people who were as young as I was, especially guys, who were more than happy to go for military training. I just wasn't ready. And I thought, what is going on? And a few other people from in the liberation struggle they also thought, these kids are too young. What are they doing here? But it was but somehow I feel maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because it toughens you up. It toughens you up. I hated every morning getting up, like every other morning, getting up at 5 in the morning to go and wake up everyone to make sure they are fine, and taking morning report, like walking a mile or two, or going to take the morning report to the camp, to the section or department commander every morning. And it was scary because you are in the jungle and it's dark, and then you have this AK-47 with no real bullets, and every lizard that moved in the trees, I would want to shoot at it, because you didn't know whether it was a lizard or it was the enemy. And that time, every time you were just scared, you were worried that the enemy would sneak up on you. So it wasn't a very stable, you didn't really feel safe. So that was the struggle. I'm just running you through the whole, and then you can ask me.
Wonderful.
Yes. And then, of course, in 19, I stayed, after the 6 months training, I was trained as a political commissar. And then I stayed in the camp, because by that time, when we finished our training, I was 17. They thought, okay, this girl, she is young. We are not going to send her to the battlefield. Let her stay here, And I had a big mouth, so they thought she would just be talking all over at the battlefield. So let her be here and become a political instructor. So I was a political instructor there, a propagandist, if you like, and which went very well until the resolution 435 was announced that it was now going to be implemented, and we came back to Namibia end of 1989. So as tough as it was, the end was just really beautiful. It made you forget everything that you that you went through. But really, the most chunk of my life at that time was spent in this refugee camp, the Nyango Swapo refugee camp. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you were the political commissar, is that what sort of motivated you then to do journalism after independence? What sort of parallels were there? What did you have to do before and after?
Yes, okay. First, the idea, before I even knew what journalism was, because you didn't know much about the outside world and how, you know, when I was in the Zambian refugee camp, okay, I didn't know what journalism was, but when I went to a Zambian secondary school, my teachers there, they always thought, they would always say, one or two of them, I remember them saying, oh, this girl would make a good journalist. I don't know if I became a good journalist later, but that's what, and then I thought, journalist? And then when I went for military training and became a political instructor, I thought, wow, that's when I started understanding a bit about what journalism is. And I thought, wow, this is something I would want, this is a career I would want to pursue, you know. And because every morning when I was a political instructor, we would give out this morning bulletin news that we got from Voice of America, Radio South Africa, and one of my colleagues, he would read the news in English, and I would translate in our language. And Lord alone knows how accurate my translations, because the language, you know, our English was...
Oshivambo?
Yes, I would translate it in Oshivambo, because a lot of people, even if they were not Oshivambo speaking people, in Exile somehow you would say Oshivambo became like a lingua franca for people there. So I would do the translations, and of course you would spice it up a little bit. And I remember the guy who would read, he would look at me that, Maria, that's not what I said, but you kept everything going. You kept everything going. And then where we said, for instance, we had soldiers in the battle, you know, who crashed with the South Africans. If 30 of our people were injured or whatever, we would turn it around and say, oh, the South Africans were injured or they were killed, just to keep the morale of the soldiers. So I kind of liked checking the news, and when I came to Namibia, I looked at all professions. I mean, what was available for a person who had not finished high school, like I went up to Form 3, which is grade 10. You know, and a lot of us did that, where, you know, the people at my age, they were in the same boat. So the only choice for us who were in exile was either to join the ministry, to be a soldier, join the Ministry of Defense, or the police force. And I remember a group of us from Exile and some of the friends I made in Katutura who never went into exile but lived in Katutura. I remember us going to sign up to be trained to be police, to be in the police force. And I was on the line for maybe an hour, but when it was almost my turn, I jumped out of the line. I said, is this really what I want for my life? At that time, I was 18, 19. Is this what I 19? I really want? No, I'm not going to be condemned to being a police. I mean, not that, I mean, there were people who were passionate about being police officers, and they're doing a great job, but it wasn't just my thing. And I was a soldier, not really by choice, so I couldn't even go there to be in the military. And I know people who love doing that, and I admire them, but it wasn't just my thing. So I jumped out of the line, and everyone thought, this is the easiest to get a job. I said, no, but I want to get some education. I'm not going to. So I came out, and then that's when I started looking around where I could do journalism. At that time, NAMPA was recruiting. And then there were all these young high school people who just graduated from high school in Namibia. And I joined, I sneaked in, and I was lucky because my English wasn't too bad at the time, you know. And they thought, okay, she can conduct some interviews. She does seem to know what she's talking about. Let's take her. Even if, and a lot of people really didn't have proper qualifications because of the educational system at the time. So I joined NAMPA, and then I worked as, they would call me, that's our banding journalist. Yes, and in 1992, I joined in 91 NAMPA, and in 92 I went to Zimbabwe to do a diploma in in mass communication, national diploma in mass communications. And after that, came back to work for NAMPA, and then I got a scholarship to go to India. Yeah, so please jump in.
It's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
I'll bounce back real quick to the liberation struggle a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I know your experience is exile, but you can maybe give it a little bit of a take on your exile experience as well as those you knew who hadn't gone into exile.
Okay.
Of the perception of Swapo, the movement, because even a lot of the people who were in Old Farm or Nyango, who, although they had a good deal of interaction with Swapo members, but certainly not Swapo leadership on a regular basis. The camp leader, yes, but not the ones who did the international diplomacy, the Sam Nyomas, the Hidipo Hamutenyas, that group, you know, and especially the ones inside Namibia, because they couldn't come back to the country once they had left.
Right.
What were people's perception of these individuals they hadn't met, these men and women who were in exile fighting for them, but no communication between them?
Let me tell you, a lot of people who were Swapo members, and some not, even those who were not Swapo members, but were really dying for the liberation. They really wanted to see the country free from the apartheid system. They just loved the Swapo leadership and what they were doing. They had a lot of respect for people who were sacrificing their lives in exile. And a lot of them, up to today, they might have not met people like Sam Nujoma back then, the Hidipo Hamutenyas, but you know, they held these people dearly to their hearts, that these guys, they are sacrificing their lives out there just to get us freedom. And also, I mean, because people inside the country, they were also fighting, they were sacrificing a lot, but they understood what was going on in exile. And
and now, then after independence, how did people perceive the new change? Because I know that a lot of people, like, very fantastic at the beginning, but then a little sobering, because you realize now you have to not just fight for a country, but you've won the country, but now you have to run the country.
right.
And how have people adjusted to this? Because it takes a while because the apartheid system pushed everything back, and it takes, of course, takes a long time to bring it to what it can be.
Right.
How have people adjusted to this in your mindset?
In my opinion, things were really going well at the beginning of our independence. Of course, the excitement was still there. You know, at the beginning, we are now free, we have our own country. But at some point, as a nation, you begin to face reality that, okay, we have now the country in our hands. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to do things differently to improve our people? And unfortunately, political-wise, like I can only speak now because I grew up in Swapo, and Swapo was like my other mom. But things that you didn't think they would happen in a Swapo party, that happened in other political parties in other countries, they started happening in fights, you know. And of course, you know about President Nghidinwa, that we respect so much and we love so dearly. And he has really done a lot for the country, you know, wanting to go further for a third term, and which really wasn't constitutional. And I'm sure you heard a lot about this. I thought that's where really the problem was, where maybe the leadership thought there wasn't someone groomed enough or ready enough to take over from Nghidinwa once he did his first 2 terms. I feel like that's where really people, all these divisions in the party started. And it's really just a pity. I am out here in DC, and I kind of look at the country and looking at what is happening at home. And it's disheartening because all I knew growing up is that comradeship. It's the comradeship. Everyone was a comrade. I mean, okay, within the Swapo party, but even when you came back, because that thing of comradeship was embedded in you, you breathe it, you live it, you know, everyone is your brother and sister. I personally, even people who didn't belong to Swapo, they were my country people. They were my people, you know. And to see my people beginning to fight each other for political power, I just didn't understand. I didn't, okay, we were fighting the enemy, we felt oppressed. Now, why should we bring all these other tendencies of fighting each other, you know, and we know we had a good reason to fight the enemy, and you know the history. But now, why can't we just get along and move our country? But then people began to be selfish, wanting power. And things don't just, and you would think Namibia, that was the last colony to gain independence by that time. You would think they would have learned from what happened in other countries. But all these things, divisions, and ethnic divisions, you know, people pointing at each other. You walk in a room, oh, she's from this ethnic group. He's from that. I'm not going. Come on now, are you serious? After all these years in exile, so I just thought it didn't make sense. And it still doesn't make sense. But thank God now, things are calming down, you know. Things are calming down, and people are really beginning to assert their Namibianness, well, I'm more of a Pan-Africanist, you know. I'm not just for Namibia, but for the entire continent, you know. Mm-hmm.
Now, my last question will deal a little World Bank.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, since you work within the African division, and what sort of things, because Namibia has performed better than most of the other countries on the continent economically, but its growth rate isn't particularly high as some would think that it could be. What, because I mean, I'm sure even if it's not your day-to-day job, you'd sort of follow the potential policies that the World Bank could take towards the World Bank and United Nations towards Namibia to maybe promote better economic policies. I don't know. What sort of plans, ideas have been put forth by the World Bank for ways Namibia can further develop itself, I suppose, economically?
Okay. You know, Namibia is not really one of the countries that the World Bank is concerned about because, I mean, like really concerned about because it's now one of the upper income countries, and therefore the World Bank doesn't really have a lot of projects, if any, in Namibia. But I'm also not supposed to talk about the World Bank because I work here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conflict of interest.
Okay.
So
Sorry,
you
we
cut
didn't
that
get
off.
to see
Yeah,
it.
sorry.
Okay, well.
But yeah, it's Namibia is one of the so-called upper income countries, so
Yeah,
it
that's
doesn't
true.
really, yes.
Do you think we could go back and clarify one or two questions? I was going to ask about maybe day-to-day life in maybe Lubanga or in exile in Zambia.
Okay, yeah. So now, can you just give an example of maybe a day in exile?
Like day-to-day life.
Maybe
Okay.
one day that you would have in Zambia versus a day that you had in Lubanga.
Okay.
Like, what a day
What
in
was it like
exile.
for someone who wasn't there? How would
Okay.
you describe it to them?
All right. So I'm in this house. Okay. First of all, we were in this one room with my aunt, with her 2 kids, and 5 sisters of mine, and my 2 brothers. But later my brother went to stay with other boys. And we're in this little room and sleeping really squeezed. And you wake up in the morning, and those who had peed that day in bed, it was a common phenomenon in the refugee camp, you would hear them crying, being whipped. And then you start your day by cleaning yourself as much as you can with the little water that you have, because our water at the beginning of our life in the camp, you had to walk a long distance to fetch water. So you always just had that much water to cook. And you would try to do, if you could make porridge that morning, then you made porridge and then went to school. So we would go to school, and around lunchtime, I think, we finished school, and then we came back home. And then now you start the daily chores. Going to fetch water or going to fetch firewood, but then you had to walk like really miles and miles to get into the woods to fetch firewood, to chop wood, and you know. Those are firewood and water fetching, and then lunchtime, those were the main duties. And then lunchtime, there was always someone in the household that would go to the common kitchen where hundreds and hundreds of people in the camp, they ate. We would go there with our individual plates to get food from the kitchen, from the main kitchen. And again, that everything in the main camp, it was a big camp. I can't tell you how big, but it was big, that you would walk like a bit of distances, 10, 20, 30 minutes to get to the other end of the camp. And you go fetch your food and then brought it to your little dwellings and ate with the family. That's if you were living in a sort of family place, like that one room we had initially for my family. But other people, they shared rooms with other people. They didn't have to be relatives, because very rare that people went in exile with their relatives. So whoever was there, your comrade is your relative. But in my case, I had my siblings with me. So that was a normal. And then as young kids, the young pioneers, we had activities, you know. We used to go to practice traditional dances, just in case we had visitors from Lusaka, the Swapo people, who were our leaders, who worked in Lusaka or in Angola at the headquarters, or if the president, Sam Nujoma, was coming in the camp. Oh, boy, didn't we love that when the president was coming. Oh, we loved that man. We loved Semnyoma. So, I mean, I still love him. I shouldn't say we love, yeah, but we loved him. And we loved our leaders. We cherished them because we knew the hard work they were doing just to make sure that we are taken care of in the refugee camp by going to all these countries to get solidarity support, you know. So we would practice so that when they came into the camp, we would dance for them, sing for them. It was beautiful, yeah. But at the back of your mind, especially at night, when you went to sleep, you are conscious that you can be bombed any day. So we had a few scares. Thank God in our Nyango refugee camp, we have never really been, we have never been attacked, like, you know, where people were killed, but we had scares, you know, like the Smith, you know, Smith who were in Rhodesia, when his jet fighters passed by our camps and we started shooting at them, but they didn't drop any bombs on us. But that, you know, just looking at the network of fire, you look at the sky and it's all, you know what was happening in Iraq, and it's traumatizing, you know, and that always remained at the back of your mind, that okay, what if we wake up and, you know, we are attacked? And every now and then we'll get this camp signal that, you know what, we heard that the enemies might be approaching our camp. So we would leave the camp and go into hiding, into the woods, outside, far, far away from the camp itself. Because now, you know, because we had established that place, so it was an easy target. So we would go outside for days and days, just outside in the woods. And then, of course, we would get supplies of foodstuff, beans and little fish. That was our staple. You know, we didn't really have, we ate meat. Maybe they would slaughter a cow, like one, and I'm a Kwanyama. Kwanyama means meat eaters. And just in my gene, I love meat. And people just love meat. Namibians love meat. So, but we didn't eat a lot of meat. That was on special occasions. I don't really remember how many times in a year that we could eat meat at the general kitchen. Although we would sneak out of the camp and go and buy meat from the neighboring Zambian stores, but it wasn't really, we would sneak out and we would go and sell our clothes and get a bit of money, because no one had money in the camp, and buy that. But we got second-hand clothes from all over. Maybe you guys were even you were young, you were babies, donated clothes to us. So that's clothes, because we had at least a bit of clothes, so we could take one or two out and sell them, and then you can get a bit stuff like tomatoes, stuff like sugar that sometimes you didn't get in the main storeroom for the entire camp. So yeah, so that was our daily life, just going out, just really, you had to be. That's why I tell people at the age of 5, 6, I was a little woman. I knew how to make food out of nothing. You know, I would be climbing trees to get the maponi worms for people, and women with their baskets in the camp, they would come to me and I would climb. You know, we eat maponi worms. That's a delicacy. And, you know, so you toughen up. You go, you fetch firewood. If, you know, someone is not taking care of their chicken, you grab the chicken and it will be history. I mean, things like, okay, no, we didn't steal. That's discipline. Well, every now and then you will be like, I thought it was our chicken. But it's survival of the fittest. That was what, so you toughen up. So our daily life was really just learning these survival skills from others. But we also enjoyed. We played sports. We played football. Yeah, I played football. We played, but mostly it was guys. Netball. We had our own traditional games, you know, like the what do you call it? Dodging the jumping rope and the dodging the dodgeball and stuff like that. We called them something else. So we had our life going on, but you just knew at the back of your mind that anytime you could be attacked. Up to today, if let's say I'm like now I'm with my nieces. My nieces are visiting from Namibia, and they're with me in my apartment. And when I'm cooking, I tell them, don't just sneak up on auntie. Don't just come in the kitchen without announcing. The other day, one of them forgot. She said, oh, auntie, watch it. Oh, I screamed, you know. I said, I told you guys, don't sneak up on auntie. And don't come to my bedroom without knocking first. Because, and we sat, this was a few days ago, and we sat down, and they said, auntie, why were you traumatized? Why are you so jumpy? And I started thinking that, you know, a few of my friends, they asked me, even in the office, I tell people that don't come and tap me at the back, you know, because I will be, I scream and my heart starts palpitating. And I thought, you know what, I guess because back then in the camp, you were always listening for that bang, you know, like every time you were scared that you're going to be bombed. So I feel maybe that's because I remember I've always been like this. Like, I don't want people sneaking up on me, unless if I know there are a lot of people. But in this country, it's worse, because usually people don't come unannounced. And when they do come unannounced, it scares me to death. Yeah. So anyway, so back in the refugee camp, that was the daily life. And also just looking forward to more supply of food, you know, that came from UNICEF or, you know, so when we had these trucks from, you know, you go in a refugee camp where there are no cars, really, a few cars for the camp administration, but really we didn't. So you could tell a Volvo that was like miles away, you could hear. And we even knew, that's a Scania. It has probably brought clothes. Oh, I hope it has brought some more bags of rice. So that was, you know, at that time. And then, of course, every day of hoping for the news. I was in exile for 15 years. Every day, you are hoping that there will be an announcement that our country is free. You know, so that anticipation, well, it keeps you going, but, you know, so, yeah. So, and then there were activities like sometimes we would go to Lusaka, to the capital. Boy, that was a treat. You would go, I went maybe to Lusaka three, 4 times in that 14 years I was in that particular camp, 13 years I was in that particular camp. But those moments were really, and and when I was 12, I went with other kids, maybe a group of maybe 10 or less. We went to the Soviet Union. First time going outside Zambia. First time on the plane, we went as young pioneers to a summer camp called Artek. It's outside Moscow. And it was lovely just seeing all these. It was like really going to Jupiter. The refugee camp is like it was a different world. There was nothing like it. I mean, it was a different world. Then when you come out, you're looking at buildings. We didn't have buildings. And when you were seeing that for the first time, I mean, of course, because when I left Namibia, I was 3. I couldn't remember the infrastructure. And I thought, oh my, and getting on the plane, of course, I was frightened when you go to the toilet and flush again. Am I going to fall? You know, things like that, as a child, it excited you. So it was really lovely just to come out of the camp for 3 weeks, going to Soviet Union. And then, of course, you are meeting all these kids from all over Eastern Europe and other countries and other African countries. And those from Eastern Europe, and they're looking at you, they had also never seen someone who didn't look like them. And we are comparing notes. They're like scrubbing my skin, like, why do you have dirt on your skin? And so it's things, yeah. So Exile was really, it was a bitter struggle, it was hardship, but we had to make the best out of it. So that was the life in the refugee camp as a kid going to school. And then the adult women, some of them, of course, we would have these chores for the whole camp, fetching firewood for the entire camp, not just for our individual little pots. And then working in the common kitchen. That was the major job, really. And then the tougher people is building houses, because every now and then we had. And we build houses from our own environment, you know. We didn't, later in the years we got like iron sheet and cement, but at the beginning really we just used what was around us. So that was in the Nyango camp. And in Lubango for military training, of course the training itself was tough, like any other military training. And I mean, it was tough. I don't even want to go there. It was tough. But after that, when I became a political instructor, it was much better. And you ate much better, you know. But when you are on training, the food supply was very shaky. Yeah, so, yeah. Anything else? No.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, I don't know if it's a touchy
I just want to
subject.
make sure we have time. We don't get towed with our car.
Oh yeah, what
We
time
only
is
had,
it?
we had 6:10, so we should probably get going in the next couple of
Okay, all right. Well, why don't we wrap it up?
And maybe we can talk
Okay.
while we're